From now on, your paycheck goes into my account. You don't need anything anyway. My son Bruce said it so casually, as if he were discussing the weather. He was leaning against my kitchen counter, arms crossed over his chest, a posture of such unearned authority that it momentarily stole my breath. He didn't look at me as he spoke. His eyes were fixed on a spot on the wall just over my head, as if the decision was so monumental, so final, that it had already been inscribed there by a higher power. I stood by the stove, my hand frozen on the handle of the pot where I was stirring the soup for his dinner, for his and his wife's dinner, a meal they expected 3 times a week like a divine right. The steam rose and curled around my wrist, but I felt nothing but a spreading, invasive cold. It was the kind of cold that starts in the marrow and works its way out, a deep internal winter that no amount of heat could touch. I was 67 years old, and for the first time in a life defined by noise, by the needs of others, by the constant hum of duty, there was only a profound and terrifying silence in my head. I heard the words, of course. They hung in the air between us, thick and oily like smoke from a faulty furnace. But my mind refused to assemble them into a coherent thought. It was a defense mechanism, I suppose, the way a body goes into shock to protect itself from overwhelming pain. My son, the baby I had held and rocked and nursed through fevers, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged and whose broken heart I had mended with ice cream and patience, was standing in my kitchen, in the house my late husband, Robert, and I had worked ourselves to the bone for, and telling me that my life, my earnings, my very autonomy was no longer my own. He said it with the placid entitlement of a king claiming his tribute. And the most chilling part, the part that would echo in my mind for weeks to come, was the addendum. You don't need anything anyway. It was a dismissal of my entire existence. I was no longer a person with wants or desires or even basic needs. I was a utility, a resource, an income stream to be diverted. I found my voice, or a thin, reedy version of it. All right, Bruce, I whispered. The agreement was a betrayal of every strong woman who had come before me, a surrender I felt deep in my soul, but it was also a shield. Arguing would lead to a storm, a tempest of his carefully curated grievances, of Tiffany's crocodile tears, of accusations that I was being selfish, that I didn't understand the pressures they were under. I had weathered those storms before, and they left me hollowed out, exhausted, and always apologizing for crimes I had not committed. So I agreed. It was easier. It had always been easier to agree. He finally looked at me then, a brief, satisfied nod, the expression of a man who had successfully concluded a business transaction. Good, he said. I'll text you the account details. Tiffany and I will be over around 7 for dinner. He turned and walked out, the front door clicking shut behind him, leaving me in a silence that was now filled with the deafening roar of my own compliance. That night, as I mechanically chopped vegetables and browned meat, my life played out in my mind like a poorly edited film. I saw myself at 25, giving up a promotion at the hospital where I worked as a nurse to go part-time after Bruce was born. Robert was a good man, a steady provider, but his work in construction was feast or famine. My steady, if reduced, paycheck was the bedrock of our family. I saw myself at 40, cashing in a portion of my meager retirement savings, $20,000, to fund Bruce's first brilliant business venture, a bespoke coffee roasting company that went bankrupt in less than a year, leaving behind nothing but the bitter aroma of burnt beans and debt. I saw myself at 58, a widow after Robert's sudden heart attack, clinging to my job not just for the money but for the sense of purpose, a reason to get out of bed in the morning. Through it all there was Bruce. Always Bruce. His needs were a constant gravitational pull on my resources, my time and my spirit. Car repairs, rent shortfalls, surprise vet bills for a dog I was sure they didn't own. The requests always came wrapped in the silken language of affection. "Oh, Mom, you're a lifesaver," he'd say, pocketing the cash. Tiffany, his wife, was even more skilled. She'd frame every request as a favor to me. "Lillian, we just want to be close by to take care of you, but our apartment is so expensive. A little help would mean we could be there for you more." They were never there for me, of course. They were there for the free meals, the free laundry service, the interest-free, perpetually forgiven loans. The soup simmered on the stove, its rich aroma filling a house that suddenly felt like a stage set. It wasn't my home anymore. It was a backdrop for my servitude. The weight of my 35 years of sacrifice, of deferred dreams and bitten-back words, settled on my shoulders. It was a physical pressure, a crushing density that made it hard to breathe. For years I had told myself this was love. This was what mothers did. They gave until they were empty, and then they found a way to give more. But looking at the two place settings I had automatically laid out for them at my small dining table, I realized it wasn't love I was feeling. It was a profound aching hollowness. I had been systematically emptied, not by love but by entitlement. And I had let it happen. A thought, cold and sharp as a shard of glass, pierced through the fog of my grief. It was an idea so out of character, so utterly alien to the person I had been my entire life, that it felt like a foreign invasion. What if I tested him? What if I created a situation where his reaction would tell me the unvarnished truth, a truth I had been too cowardly to face? He said I didn't need anything. He saw me as an ATM and my home as a free restaurant and hotel. He didn't see me. He saw the things that surrounded me, the comfort I provided. So what if the things were gone? That night, after they had eaten their fill, praised my cooking with the distracted air of restaurant critics, and left a pile of dishes in the sink for me to deal with, I did not sleep. I sat in the dark, in my comfortable armchair, and felt its solid presence beneath me. I ran my hand over the worn velvet, a history of my life etched into its fibers. This was where Robert and I had watched television, where I had rocked a colicky Bruce to sleep, where I had graded nursing school papers, where I had cried after my husband's funeral. The chair was a part of me. The sturdy oak dining table, the matching sideboard filled with my mother's china, the plush sofa they always sprawled on. These were not just objects. They were anchors to my past, witnesses to my life. And I decided they had to go. The next morning I made a phone call. I found a consignment shop that also did estate clearances. The man on the phone was kind, his voice gentle. "Are you sure, ma'am?" he asked when I told him I wanted to sell everything. The big pieces, anyway. The living room and dining room furniture. I imagined he thought I was a destitute old woman, forced to sell her belongings to survive. The irony was a bitter pill in my throat. I was selling my belongings to see if I had already ceased to exist in the eyes of my only child. I set the appointment for the following day. I felt a strange, terrifying surge of power. For the first time in decades, I was doing something that was not for Bruce. It was for me. It was a desperate, painful act of self-discovery. The men from the consignment store were efficient and respectful. They wrapped my sofa in blankets, carefully maneuvered the heavy oak table through the door, and took the sideboard that had been in my family for 3 generations. With each piece that left, a chunk of my history went with it. The rooms became cavernous, echoing voids. The ghosts of laughter and conversation seemed to flee, leaving behind a stark, naked space. When they were finished, I stood in the middle of my living room. All that remained was a single hard-backed kitchen chair I had asked them to leave, and the television on its simple stand. The emptiness was breathtaking. It was the physical manifestation of how I felt inside. I paid the men, and then I sat on that lone chair in the vast, empty room and I waited. I felt like a scientist who had set up a cruel experiment, waiting to see if her hypothesis was correct. The silence in the house was absolute. It was a Tuesday, one of their designated dinner nights. At precisely 7 o'clock, I heard Bruce's key in the lock. He never knocked. It was his right, he believed, to enter my home as if it were his own. "Mom? We're here. What's for dinner?" "I'm starving." His voice boomed from the entryway. Tiffany's higher-pitched greeting followed. "Lillian, darling, we brought you that gossip magazine you like." Then they walked into the living room. The scream was not immediate. First, there was a sharp collective intake of breath, a sound of pure, unadulterated shock. Then Tiffany shrieked, a high, piercing sound of genuine horror. "Oh my God! What happened? Were you robbed?" Bruce's reaction was different. It was slower, a deep, guttural roar of disbelief that morphed into pure rage. His face, which had been relaxed and expectant, contorted into a mask of fury. His eyes darted around the empty space, not looking for me, but for his missing comforts. He saw the empty spot where the sofa should have been, the bare floor where his favorite armchair used to sit. He saw the void where the dining table was supposed to be, laden with his free meal. "What the hell is this?" he bellowed, his voice echoing in the barren room. He finally turned his eyes on me, sitting quietly on my lone kitchen chair. There was no concern in his gaze, No worry that I had been the victim of a crime. There was only accusation. What did you do? I sold it, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. The coldness inside me had solidified into something hard and clear, like a diamond. I sold the furniture. Tiffany stared at me, her mouth agape. But why? The antique sideboard? Lillian, that was supposed to be ours. The slip was instantaneous, a perfect unscripted revelation of her true heart. Not "I hope you got a good price," or "Are you okay?" but a cry of possessiveness over something that was never hers. Bruce took a step toward me, his fists clenched. Are you insane? Have you lost your mind? You sold it all? Without asking me. The question was the final piece of the puzzle, the confirmation of my darkest fear. Without asking me. He believed he had veto power over my life, my property, my decisions. In his mind, my home and everything in it already belonged to him. I was just the live-in caretaker. You said I didn't need anything, Bruce, I said, the words falling like ice chips into the heated air. This is me not needing anything. There's leftover soup in the fridge if you're hungry. You'll have to eat it standing up. His face turned a mottled shade of red. The rage was biblical. This is not about the furniture, and you know it. This is about you being difficult. About you trying to control me with your money. The hypocrisy was so staggering it was almost beautiful in its audacity. He, who had just demanded my entire paycheck, was accusing me of financial control. He, who had lived off my generosity his entire adult life, was the victim. We're leaving, he snarled, grabbing Tiffany's arm. Clearly, you're having some kind of mental breakdown. We'll talk when you decide to stop acting like a child. They stormed out, slamming the door so hard that the empty house seemed to shudder. I sat on my hard chair in the echoing silence, and for the first time in a very long time, I did not feel hollow. I felt a terrible righteous anger beginning to burn away the cold. My experiment was a resounding success. My son didn't love me. He loved what I provided. And he had just proven it beyond any shadow of a doubt. The test was over. Now the real work began. The anger was a strange companion. For days it sat in my chest, a dense hot stone. It wasn't the fleeting explosive anger I had seen in Bruce. It was a slow-burning, methodical fire. It didn't make me want to scream, it made me want to think. It sharpened my senses and cleared the fog of grief and obligation that had clouded my judgment for decades. That cold, clear diamond of resolve I had felt during the confrontation was now my entire being. I knew, with a certainty that was as absolute as the law of gravity, that Bruce's demand for my paycheck and his fury over the furniture were not the beginning of the story. They were the culmination of something that had been happening for a very long time. The exploitation wasn't new, only my awareness of it was. I started with the bank statements. For years I had just glanced at them, checking the balance, noting my pension deposit, and filing them away. I had trusted him. Why wouldn't I? He was my son. Now I pulled out the dusty boxes from the back of the closet and spread them across the bare living room floor. I went back 1 year, then 2, then 5. With a pen and a ledger, I started to create a timeline of my own financial ruin. The work was painstaking, each line item a small, fresh betrayal. There were the weekly cash withdrawals, always just under the amount that would trigger a notice. Hundreds of dollars every single week. When I cross-referenced them with my calendar, they always coincided with the days before he and Tiffany visited. He was taking cash for his groceries, then coming to my house to eat my food. Then I found the credit card payments. Payments to cards I didn't recognize. I didn't own a credit card. Robert and I had believed in living within our means. A cold dread washed over me. I spent an entire morning on the phone with faceless, sympathetic customer service agents from 3 different major banks. The story was the same each time. Yes, Mrs. King, a card was opened in your name on this date. Yes, Mrs. King, the secondary cardholder is listed as Bruce King. Yes, Mrs. King, the mailing address for the statements was changed to a post office box 2 years ago. He had opened credit cards in my name. He had been using my good credit, my spotless financial history, as his personal slush fund. I laid the statements out on the floor, the papers forming a mosaic of his greed. Thousands of dollars spent at expensive restaurants I had never been to. Airline tickets to vacation spots they had told me they could only dream of visiting. High-end electronics, designer clothes, bar tabs that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Each purchase was a lie. Each charge was a knife twisting in my heart. I added it all up. The fraudulent credit card debt, the steady cash withdrawals, the loans that were never repaid. It came to a staggering sum, far more than the initial $18,000 I had first calculated. It was closer to $50,000, a vast gaping hole blown in the side of my modest retirement. The $20,000 business loan was just the down payment on a lifetime of theft. The anger burned hotter, but it was a clean fire now, burning away the last vestiges of my naivete. The hurt was still there, a deep aching wound, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was fuel. I remembered every sacrifice, every skipped vacation, every worn-out coat I didn't replace, every time I had told myself that my needs could wait. I had been funding their lavish lifestyle while I carefully counted my pennies. I had been their secret benefactor, and my reward was to be told I didn't need anything. I knew I couldn't do this alone. The thought of confronting Bruce again, armed with this mountain of evidence, filled me with a familiar dread. He would twist it, turn it back on me. He would call me confused, mistaken. He would unleash a torrent of gaslighting and emotional manipulation that would leave me doubting my own sanity. I needed an ally, someone who could look at the facts without the complicated, painful filter of a mother's love. My first thought was of Martha, my next-door neighbor. We had been neighbors for 30 years, sharing cups of sugar, gossip over the fence, and silent companionship after we were both widowed. Martha was pragmatic and sharp, with a tongue that could clip hedges. She had seen Bruce and Tiffany's weekly processions to my house, had witnessed their expensive new car, had heard the way Bruce spoke to me when he thought no one was listening. I had always been too ashamed to confide in her, to admit the reality of my situation. That shame was gone now, incinerated in the fire of my newfound rage. I walked over to her house, the stack of damning bank statements clutched in my hand like a holy text. She opened the door, her face immediately softening with concern. "Lillian, I saw the truck the other day. Is everything all right?" I didn't answer right away. I just walked past her into her warm, cluttered kitchen and laid the papers out on her table. For the next hour I told her everything. The demand for my paycheck. The furniture. The years of financial drain. The credit cards. I didn't cry. My voice was low and even, the voice of a woman reading a final damning verdict. Martha listened without interrupting, her expression growing harder and colder with every word. She picked up one of the credit card statements, her eyes scanning the list of extravagant purchases. She let out a low whistle. "The little monster," she breathed. "I knew it. I always knew he was a piece of work, Lillian. I never said anything, it wasn't my place, but the way he looked at you. Like you were his personal property." Her validation was like a cool drink of water in a desert. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining it. Someone else saw it too. "So," she said, her eyes meeting mine, a fierce loyalty burning in them. "What are you going to do about it?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I feel like I should call the police, but he's my son." "He stopped being your son the day he forged your signature on a credit card application," Martha said, her voice devoid of sentimentality. "That's fraud, Lillian. That's a crime. But going to the police right away might get messy. He'll play the victim. You need to be smarter than him. You need a professional. You need a lawyer." She tapped a perfectly manicured nail on the table. "My nephew David, he's a lawyer. Not a fancy one, but he's smart and he hates bullies. Let me make a call." Meeting David was the next critical step in my transformation. He was a young man with kind eyes but a mind like a steel trap. I sat in his modest office, a world away from the gleaming corporate towers downtown, and I told my story for the second time. He listened with the same focused intensity as his aunt, but his questions were sharp, precise. He looked through the statements, nodding grimly. "This is extensive," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "This isn't just a case of a son borrowing money. This is a pattern of calculated, long-term financial abuse. The fraudulent cards are the nail in his coffin. That's identity theft." He explained my options clearly. We could report it to the police and press criminal charges, or we could pursue a civil case to recover the money. Given the family connection, he advised, a civil suit might be more effective. We demand full repayment, and we use the threat of criminal charges as leverage. It gives him a chance to make it right without a felony conviction, which often makes judges and even the defendant more agreeable. Make it right. I asked, the words tasting like ash. How can he ever make this right? He can't, not emotionally, David said gently. But he can give you your money back. He can be held accountable. Justice, Mrs. King, isn't always about healing the wound. Sometimes it's about cleaning it out so it can finally start to close. His words resonated deep within me. That's what I needed. Not revenge, not anymore. I needed accountability. I needed a cleansing. I hired him on the spot. My hidden advantage, David told me, was my entire life. I was a retired nurse with a spotless record, a grieving widow, a respected member of my community. Bruce was a man in his late 30s with a string of failed businesses and no visible means of supporting his lavish lifestyle. The narrative was on my side. All we needed to do was present the facts. The first concrete action was quiet, but it was an earthquake. On David's advice, I went to my bank. I closed my old account, the one Bruce had the details for, and opened a new one at a different branch. I redirected my pension and my small Social Security check to the new account. I cut the cord. The silence was immediate. For the first week I heard nothing. It was a blissful, peaceful silence I hadn't realized I was missing. Then the predictable storm began. It started with a text. Mom, need to borrow $200 for car insurance. Can you transfer? I ignored it. An hour later my phone rang. It was Bruce. I let it go to voicemail. Mom, pick up. It's an emergency. The messages grew more frantic. Then Tiffany started. Lillian, darling, we're so worried. You're not answering. Is everything okay? Bruce is just beside himself with worry. The performance was so transparent it was almost comical. When the texts and calls didn't work, they escalated. They showed up at my house. I saw them through the peephole, their faces tight with anxiety and annoyance. I didn't answer the door. They banged on it for 10 minutes, their shouts growing louder and less concerned, more demanding. Mom, open the door. We know you're in there. What is wrong with you? This was the antagonist escalation David had warned me about. They were losing control and it was making them desperate. The final desperate act was the one that truly revealed the depths of their cruelty. The social media campaign began. It started with a vague, pity-seeking post on Bruce's Facebook page. So hard when you try to care for an aging parent and they just push you away. Pray for my family. The comments from his friends, people who had never met me, were dripping with sympathy. You're such a good son, Bruce. Thinking of you guys. Then the post became more specific, more venomous. Tiffany joined in, portraying herself as the long-suffering daughter-in-law. They painted a picture of me as a manipulative, toxic mother, a mentally unstable old woman who was squandering her money and refusing the loving care of her only son. He called me senile. He claimed I was a danger to myself. The most painful post was a picture of him and me from years ago. A happy moment at his college graduation with a caption that read, "I miss the mom I used to have. It's so hard to watch her decline." For anyone out there dealing with a toxic parent, you're not alone. Each post was a public stoning. My own son was telling the world I was crazy, that I was a monster, all because I had turned off the flow of money. The humiliation was a physical sickness. I wanted to hide, to disappear. But then I remembered David's words. Document everything. I sat at my computer, my hands shaking, and I took a screenshot of every post, every comment, every lie. I printed them out and added them to the growing pile of evidence. This wasn't just slander. It was proof of his motive. It was a character assassination designed to isolate me and discredit me before I could expose him. He was trying to control the narrative, but he didn't know that I was writing a much more powerful one. A story written in bank statements and legal documents. A story of the truth. Foiling their manipulation was surprisingly simple, though it took every ounce of my newfound strength. When Bruce finally caught me outside taking out the trash, his face a mask of fake concern, I did not engage. Mom, thank God. I've been so worried. You're not well. You need help. Tiffany and I can manage your finances, take the stress off you. I looked him directly in the eye, my gaze as steady and cold as a winter lake. Bruce, I said, my voice calm and firm, any and all future communication between us will go through my lawyer, David Miller. Here is his card. I pressed the small piece of cardboard into his hand and walked back inside, locking the door behind me. Through the peephole, I watched him stare at the card, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning, horrified realization. He had overplayed his hand. He had mistaken my kindness for weakness for far too long. The game had changed, and he was only just beginning to understand the new rules. The day of the court hearing was gray and overcast, the sky the color of slate. It suited my mood perfectly. I felt no nervousness, no fear. I felt only a profound sense of finality, as if I were about to close the last chapter of a long, painful book. I wore a simple navy blue dress, the one I used to wear to church with Robert. Felt like armor. Martha sat beside me in the gallery, a silent, formidable presence, her hand resting reassuringly on my arm. Across the courtroom, Bruce and Tiffany sat with their lawyer. Bruce was trying to project an air of wounded confidence, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. Tiffany was dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue, a masterful performance for an audience of one. The judge. The trap was not a dramatic, last-minute reveal. It was the meticulous, undeniable weight of evidence, presented by David with calm, surgical precision. He began by establishing my life story. A dedicated nurse for 35 years, a widow of good standing, a mother who had sacrificed for her son. Then, he began to dismantle Bruce's. He presented the bank statements, the endless cash withdrawals, the canceled check for the $20,000 business loan that was never repaid. He projected the fraudulent credit card applications onto a large screen, my forged signature stark and damning. He showed the statements filled with lavish expenses, cross-referencing the dates with Bruce and Tiffany's social media posts, where they bragged about their wonderful vacations and expensive dinners. With each piece of evidence, I could feel the atmosphere in the courtroom shift. The judge, a stern-faced woman with intelligent eyes, leaned forward, her gaze fixed on Bruce. His lawyer objected weakly, but the paper trail was irrefutable. The final act was the presentation of the social media campaign. David put the screenshots on the screen. Bruce's post calling me toxic, senile, mentally unstable. Then, he put up the text messages from those exact same dates, the ones where Bruce was desperately begging me for money. The contrast was devastating. The narrative of the concerned son evaporated, replaced by the stark reality of a desperate manipulator trying to discredit his victim. The judge turned her attention to my son. "Mr. King," she said, her voice cutting through the silent courtroom. "You sit here today trying to portray your mother as mentally incompetent, yet the evidence suggests the only thing she was incompetent at was recognizing the extent of your avarice. You claim she is a toxic influence, yet the record shows a decades-long pattern of you draining her resources while she was trying to help you. Can you explain to me how these two realities coexist?" Bruce stammered, his face pale and slick with sweat. He tried to spin a tale of misunderstandings, of good intentions, but his words were hollow, his lies transparent under the harsh lights of the courtroom. He looked small and pathetic, a spoiled child caught with his hand deep in the cookie jar. Tiffany had abandoned her performance and was staring at him with a look of pure fury, no doubt calculating how this public humiliation would impact her own life. In that moment, watching him crumble, I didn't feel triumph or glee. I felt a profound, detached sadness. It was the final death of the son I thought I had, the boy I had loved so fiercely. In his place was a stranger, a man I didn't know and certainly didn't respect. The judge's verdict was swift and unequivocal. Bruce was found liable for the full amount of the fraudulent charges and the documented cash withdrawals. He was ordered to repay every single cent with interest. And then came the final, most satisfying blow. As a condition of avoiding a criminal fraud referral, the judge ordered him to issue a public retraction and apology on the same social media platforms he had used to slander me. The public humiliation was absolute. He had to sell the fancy car he couldn't afford and drain his own savings to begin paying me back. The court put a lien on any future earnings. His carefully constructed life, funded by my life's work, came crashing down. The apology he posted was brief and legally sanitized, but it was there for all to see. He had to admit he had misrepresented the nature of our family's financial disagreements, and publicly state that I was of sound mind and character. His friends were silent. The sycophantic comments disappeared. He was exposed. Vindication was not a thunderclap, It was a quiet dawn. It was the feeling of walking out of that courthouse into the afternoon sun, taking a deep breath, and feeling the immense, crushing weight on my chest finally begin to lift. I severed all ties. I blocked their numbers, their social media profiles. I reclaimed my life from their orbit. The emptiness in my house no longer felt like a void of loss. It felt like a canvas of possibility. Slowly, carefully, I began to fill it again. I went to a different furniture store. Not the expensive one they favored, but a small family-owned shop. I bought a comfortable armchair just for me, in a cheerful yellow fabric. I bought a small round table perfect for two, for me and a friend like Martha. I chose each piece not for what it represented of my past, but for what it promised for my future. My new life began to take shape. I reconnected with old friends from the hospital, women I had lost touch with while I was consumed by Bruce's endless needs. I joined Martha's gardening club. I found a quiet joy in the simple act of nurturing something and watching it grow, something that didn't demand anything but water and sunlight in return. I started volunteering at the local library, reading stories to children. Their uncomplicated delight was a balm to my wounded soul. I was no longer just a mother, a widow, a resource. I was Lillian, a woman who loved books, who had a knack for growing roses, who had friends who valued her for her company, not her bank account. The ordeal taught me the hardest and most valuable lesson of my life. My worth is not defined by what I can give to others, but by the respect I demand for myself. Self-sacrifice is not a virtue when it enables cruelty and disrespect. Setting boundaries is not an act of selfishness. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. My son saw me as a utility to be exploited, an endless well from which he could draw. He was wrong. I am the wellspring itself, and I finally learned to nourish my own garden. He is out there somewhere, dealing with the consequences of his own choices, a footnote in a life that is now finally my own. I have found a peace that is deeper and more resilient than any happiness I had known before, because it is a peace I built myself, on a foundation of self-respect. This journey was the most painful of my life, but it led me to a freedom I never knew was possible. It's a quiet freedom found in a cup of tea in my sunny new armchair, in a shared laugh with a dear friend, in the simple, profound knowledge that I am enough all on my own. What would you do if you were in my place? Could you have made the same difficult choices to reclaim your life? I share my story not for pity, but in the hope that it might give strength to someone else who feels invisible in their own life. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd be interested to read your opinions. And if you're listening to this story from far away, write me where you heard this story. I find it comforting to know that these experiences connect us, no matter the distance. If you appreciate stories like this and want to support the channel, please consider liking this video and subscribing. It helps more than you know. For those who are able to, there's a super thanks option, and any support is deeply appreciated and allows me to continue sharing these important narratives. There are many other stories waiting for you. With heartfelt greetings. Until next time.